It's Harlan Buckley. Where are we on the deal with the Arabs?
We need to close the deal by the morning, regardless of the antitrust issues. Tell the board I won't take no for an answer.
Listen, nothing is more important than this deal. I'm coming right away.
Soulless man.
The hospital doors slid open, and I watched my boss stride past me like I didn't exist, his phone pressed to his ear, while his 19-year-old daughter fought for her life 30 feet away in the ICU. He wasn't calling family. He was calling his PR team. That's when I knew I had to give him the USB drive. 3 marriages were about to end in 7 days, and I was the one who would end them. Wait, before I tell you how 6 years of silence turned into the biggest scandal in Silicon Valley, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear involves billion-dollar divorces, hidden recordings, and one chauffeur who finally said enough. This is a true story about power, invisible people, and the moment truth stopped being optional. Let's go. My name is Toby, and 6 years ago, I was a broke audio engineer in San Francisco who just lost everything. My mother was sick. Medical bills were crushing me. I needed money fast. That's when I saw the job posting, private chauffeur for high net worth individual, discretion essential. I'll never forget my interview with Harlan Buckley. He sat in the back of his black Mercedes, looked me up and down and said, "You know what I value most in a driver, Toby? Invisibility. Can you do that?" I needed the job. So I said, "Yes, sir. You won't even know I'm there." He smiled. "Perfect. You start Monday." Here's the thing most people don't understand about being a chauffeur for the ultra-wealthy. You become furniture. They forget you have ears. They forget you have a conscience. And when you're invisible that long, you see everything. For 6 years, I drove Harlan Buckley everywhere. I heard 3 marriages collapse. I heard business deals, mistresses, lawyers. And I heard his daughter, Melissa, begging for help while he ignored her. Last Thursday at 2 a.m., Melissa overdosed. And I finally stopped being invisible. That first day, I showed up 30 minutes early wearing a suit I'd borrowed from a friend and shoes I'd polished 3 times the night before. I needed this job so badly I could taste it. My mother's hospital bills were stacked on my kitchen table in a pile that seemed to grow taller every week, and the bankruptcy notice from the recording studio was still sitting in my inbox, unopened because reading it would make it real. I'd worked at that studio for 8 years. Started as an intern, worked my way up to lead engineer. I knew every board, every microphone, every room's acoustic signature like the back of my hand. Then the owner's gambling debts caught up with him, and one Tuesday morning we all showed up to locked doors and a notice from the bank. No severance, no warning, just gone. That was 4 months before I applied to be Harlan Buckley's driver. 4 months of watching my savings evaporate. 4 months of my mother asking if I was okay while her medical bills mounted. 4 months of applying for audio engineering positions that didn't exist anymore because studios were closing left and right, replaced by kids with laptops in their bedrooms. So when I saw that job posting, private chauffeur for high net worth individual, discretion essential, competitive salary and full benefits, I applied within 5 minutes. I didn't care that I'd be driving instead of engineering. I didn't care that it felt like giving up on my career. I cared that it came with health insurance. When Harlan Buckley climbed into the back seat that Monday morning, he looked exactly like his Forbes profile photo. Silver hair, perfectly styled, charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. The kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. He didn't look at me, not even a glance. Just settled into the leather seat, opened his laptop and said, "JFK, Terminal 4. Don't talk to me unless the car is on fire." "Yes, sir," I said. That was my entire job description. The first week was a blur of learning the routine. Up at 5 a.m. to have the car cleaned and ready. Morning pickup at 6:30, drive to the office in Midtown, wait. Afternoon meetings meant shuttling between offices and restaurants. Evening meant hotels. Our fundraisers, private clubs with valet stands where the other drivers wouldn't meet my eyes. Late nights outside restaurants where the bill for one dinner could have covered my mother's medication for a month. I learned fast. Harlan took calls in the car, so I kept the engine quiet and the air conditioning perfect. He liked his coffee black, extra hot, waiting in the cup holder when he got in. He hated small talk, hated traffic updates, hated anything that reminded him I was a person and not just a function of the vehicle. I learned to read his moods in the rearview mirror. The slight tightening of his jaw meant a deal had gone badly. The way he drummed his fingers on his knee meant he was about to make a call he didn't want to make. The particular set of his shoulders when he was with his wife meant a fight was coming. I learned all of this in 3 weeks. What I didn't expect was how quickly I'd stop existing. It happened so gradually I almost didn't notice. First, Harlan stopped acknowledging me when he got in the car. Then he stopped saying thank you when I held the door. Then he started taking phone calls. Sensitive ones, the kind you'd think someone would want privacy for. Right there in the back seat like I was part of the upholstery. Other passengers were the same. Business partners would climb in and immediately start discussing deals, mergers, insider information. His lawyer talked about strategy, about loopholes, about how to structure things to avoid taxes or scrutiny. His accountant discussed offshore accounts with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. And the women. God, the women. His wife Patricia was the first one who really made me understand how invisible I'd become. 3 weeks into the job, I was driving her and her sister to lunch in Greenwich Village. The privacy screen went up, that tinted barrier between the front and back seat that was supposed to give passengers privacy, but really just made them forget I had ears. I could hear everything. The car wasn't that big, and the privacy screen didn't block sound, just sight. But they talked like I was deaf, like I was furniture. "I can't do this anymore," Patricia said, and I could hear tears in her voice, that particular thickness that comes from crying so much you're exhausted by it. "I married money, not a man. Now I just need an exit strategy that doesn't destroy me financially." Her sister's voice was cold, practical. "You need leverage, but something he can't fight back against. Documents, proof of something, otherwise his lawyers will bury you." "He'll fight anyway," Patricia said, and there was resignation in her voice, defeat. "That's what he does. He destroys everyone who leaves him. Look at his first wife. She got nothing, and she can't even talk about it because of the NDA. Jesus, there was a first wife before you? Married at 25, divorced at 30. She tried to fight the prenup and he crushed her. That's his pattern. He acquires, he uses, he discards." I kept my eyes on the road, my face blank, professional, invisible, but my hands were tight on the wheel. I dropped them at the restaurant and waited in the car, my mind spinning. I thought about my mother, how my father had left when I was 10, how she'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, so how she never complained even when I knew she was exhausted. I thought about how scared she'd been when she got sick, how she kept apologizing for the medical bills like it was her fault her body was failing. I thought about Patricia's voice, the fear in it, the resignation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, kept thinking about what Patricia's sister had said. "You need leverage, proof." I knew about proof. I'd spent 8 years capturing sound, making records, documenting performances. I knew how to capture a voice so clearly you could hear someone's breath, their hesitation, their lies. At 2 a.m., I got out of bed and drove to the electronics store in Brooklyn where I used to buy equipment before the studio collapsed. It was closed, obviously, but I sat in the parking lot making a list. What I needed. What it would cost. What I was really considering doing. The next morning, I was waiting when they opened. The owner, Marcus, recognized me immediately. "Toby!" "Man, I heard about the studio. That's rough. You back in the business?" "Not exactly," I said. "I need something small, professional grade, something that could capture clear audio in a confined space like a car." His eyebrows went up. "What kind of car work you doing?" "Just, I need insurance, documentation, for my own protection." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I got something. Digital recorder, small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. Battery lasts 12 hours, memory for hundreds of hours of recording. Professional grade, same thing court reporters use. He pulled it from a locked cabinet behind the counter. It was the size of a deck of cards, yet matte black, beautiful in its simplicity. "Whatever you're recording," Marcus said as he rang it up, "make sure it's legal. I don't want to hear you got in trouble with this." "It's just insurance," I told him. "Just protection." And I believed that, sitting in my car in the parking lot, turning the device over in my hands. I told myself it was like a dash cam, like documentation, like protecting myself in case Harlan ever turned on me the way Patricia said he turned on everyone. I told myself I'd probably never even use it. The next morning, I slipped it into my jacket pocket and drove Harlan to his office. The weight of it against my ribs felt significant, like carrying a secret. I kept the car in park in his driveway, my finger hovering over the record button. Then I pressed it. The tiny red light came on, the invisible unless you knew to look for it. I slipped the recorder back into my pocket and drove. That day was like any other. Morning pickup, office, lunch meeting, afternoon calls. Harlan talked on the phone about quarterly earnings, about a difficult board member, about whether to fire his VP of operations. Normal business, nothing worth recording. I almost turned it off. But then, a week later, something changed. Harlan called me into his study, this massive room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, first editions he'd never read, expensive art on walls he never looked at. He was sitting behind his desk, phone in hand, not looking up. "Toby," he said, "you've been with me a month now. You're working out well." "Thank you, sir." "You know what I appreciate most about you?" He still wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on his screen, just scrolling through emails. "No, sir. You're invisible. You don't ask questions. You don't gossip. You don't exist outside of your function. That's your value. Keep it up." "Yes, sir," I said. In my pocket, the recorder was running. It had been running every day for a week. And I said nothing. I went home that night and listened to the recording. His voice came through perfectly clear. "You're invisible. That's your value." I sat in my empty apartment, the recorder on my kitchen table next to my mother's pill bottles and medical invoices, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. He was right. I was invisible to him. To all of them, not because I was good at my job, but because they genuinely didn't see me as a person. I was a function, a service, as human as the leather seats or the GPS, and somewhere in that moment, sitting alone at 1 a.m. listening to my boss explain my own invisibility, I made a decision I didn't fully understand yet. I would keep recording, not for insurance anymore, but because invisible people see everything. And maybe, I thought, touching the recorder with one finger, maybe someday that would matter. The affair started 4 months after I began recording. I didn't know that's what it was at first. I just noticed Patricia making more phone calls, her voice different, lighter, younger, almost hopeful. The privacy screen would go up and she'd laugh at things that weren't funny, the kind of performance laughter women do when they're trying to be charming. "I can't wait to see you," she'd say. "Tuesday. Yes, the gallery opening. He'll be in Boston." I kept my eyes on the road and my finger on the record button. It took me 3 weeks to piece together what was happening. Her art dealer, a man named Christopher whose gallery was in Chelsea, who had kind eyes in the one photo I found online, who probably had no idea what he was walking into. Patricia would have me drop her at galleries, museums, coffee shops in neighborhoods Harlan never went to. She started dressing differently on these trips, softer somehow, more color. Once, I watched her in the rearview mirror touching up her lipstick before I let her out, and she looked almost like a different person. Younger, less afraid. I should have felt something about it. Judgment, maybe, or pity. But mostly I felt nothing. Just drove, just recorded, just watched. The phone calls got more frequent, more desperate. I know it's complicated, she said once, heading back from a lunch that had gone long. But he doesn't love me. He never did. I was 25 when we met, and I thought, God, I was so stupid. I thought being chosen by someone powerful meant something. A pause while Christopher said something I couldn't hear. No, you don't understand. He doesn't get angry. That would require caring. He just removes obstacles. That's what I'll become when he finds out. An obstacle. Her voice cracked on that last word. I pulled up to the townhouse and let her out. She thanked me without looking at me, like always, and disappeared inside. That night I listened to the recording 3 times. Her voice when she talked to Christopher was different from her voice anywhere else. Real, maybe, or at least less performed. 6 weeks later, Harlan found out. I don't know how. Maybe someone saw them. Maybe he had her followed. Maybe he just knew the way predators know when prey tries to escape. I was driving him home from dinner when his phone rang. His lawyer, Dennis, the kind of attorney who charged $1,000 an hour and earned every penny by having absolutely no conscience. We need to talk about Patricia, Dennis said. I could hear him clearly through the car's Bluetooth, his voice flat and professional. What about her? She's having an affair, art dealer in Chelsea. Been going on for about 3 months. I have photos, timestamps, everything you need. Silence in the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Harlan's face was completely calm. No anger, no hurt, nothing. He could have been reading the weather report. Good work, he said finally. File for divorce tomorrow. I want the prenup enforced to the letter. No negotiations, no settlements, nothing. And Dennis? Yes? I want her destroyed, reputation annihilation. Make sure everyone knows what she did. Every society page, every gossip column. I want her so radioactive that Christopher runs screaming. Consider it done. Harlan hung up and went back to his emails like nothing had happened. In my pocket, the recorder captured every word. The next 3 months were a masterclass in destruction. Harlan's legal team moved like a machine. Papers were filed, accounts were frozen, mutual friends were contacted with carefully worded explanations that made Patricia sound unstable, unfaithful, gold-digging. Photos appeared in page 6, her and Christopher leaving a restaurant, his hand on her back, the headline reading, "Billionaire's wife caught in Chelsea love nest." I drove Patricia less after that. She stopped going out, stopped making calls. The few times I saw her, she looked hollowed out, like something vital had been scooped away, but I still heard everything because Harlan's calls happened in my car. The prenup is airtight, Dennis reported. She gets nothing. Not the apartment, not alimony, nothing but what she brought into the marriage, which was basically debt and a communications degree. What about the narrative? Harlan asked. We're controlling it. She looks like a gold digger who got caught. Christopher's gallery is losing clients. Turns out wealthy collectors don't like homewreckers. He'll probably dump her within a month. Good. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into the divorce proceedings, I was parked outside Harlan's office when Patricia called me directly. It was the first time she'd ever called me. The first time she'd acknowledged I existed beyond my function as a driver. Toby, she said, and her voice was so tired it hurt to hear. Can you take me to my sister's? I just need to get some things. Of course, ma'am. I picked her up at the townhouse. She came out with 2 suitcases, everything she owned reduced to 2 bags. She'd lost weight. Her hair, usually perfect, was pulled back in a careless ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup. She got in the back seat, and for a long moment she just sat there. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, big gasping sobs that shook her whole body. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, from a place past dignity or performance. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I'm sorry, she said finally, wiping her face with her sleeve. I'm so sorry. You must think I'm pathetic. No, ma'am. He never loved me, she said, and she was talking to herself more than to me. I was an acquisition, a trophy, something to have because men like him collect beautiful things. And when I tried to find something real, something that made me feel human, he destroyed it. He destroyed me. She was quiet for a moment, then laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? Christopher left me, just like Harlan predicted. Couldn't handle the pressure, the publicity, the lawsuit Harlan's lawyers threatened. So now I have nothing. No husband, no money, no lover, no friends because they all chose him. I have a 13-year-old daughter who won't talk to me because her father told her I'm a whore, and 2 suitcases of clothes I'll probably have to sell. In my pocket, the recorder was running. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. She laughed again, sharper. Are you, or are you just saying what you're supposed to say? I didn't answer because I didn't know. We drove in silence to her sister's apartment in Queens. When we got there, she sat for a moment with her hand on the door handle. You seem like a good person, Toby, she said quietly. Get out while you can, before he makes you into something you're not. Then she grabbed her suitcases and walked away. She didn't look back, didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge that I existed. And why would she? I was the driver, furniture, part of the machinery that had crushed her. That night, Harlan had dinner with a business partner, Marcus Chen, at some exclusive steakhouse in Tribeca. I waited outside, the engine running, the recorder running. They came out 2 hours later, all both slightly drunk, Marcus laughing at something Harlan had said. You really took her to the cleaners, Marcus said as they climbed into the car. Had to, Harlan replied. Can't let these things slide. Women are investments, Marcus. You acquire them at fair value, you extract what use you can, and when they stop performing, you cut your losses early. Patricia stopped performing the day she married me. This was just the natural conclusion. What about your daughter? Melissa? Harlan's voice was dismissive. She's 13. She'll get over it. Kids are resilient, and honestly, it's better she learns now that actions have consequences. Her mother made choices. Marcus laughed uncomfortably. Jesus, Harlan, that's cold. That's business. I drove them in silence, my hands tight on the wheel. The divorce finalized 3 weeks later, and Patricia got nothing. The settlement was sealed, the NDA was signed, and she disappeared from Harlan's life like she'd never existed. I saw Melissa once during all of this, maybe a month before the divorce was final. Harlan had me pick her up from school to drive her to some appointment. She was small for 13, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She got in the back seat quietly, her school bag clutched against her chest. We'd been driving for maybe 5 minutes when she said, "Can you tell my dad something for me?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Of course. Tell him I said please don't hurt Mom anymore. Tell him she's sorry and she loves him and please just stop. Her voice was so small, so young, so desperately hopeful that something in my chest cracked. I'll tell him, I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to staring out the window. That night I gave Harlan the message word for word. He was in his study, reviewing contracts. He didn't look up. Noted, he said. That was it. Just noted. Melissa's plea, her hope, her love for her mother, all of it dismissed with one word. I went home and sat in my apartment listening to that day's recordings. Patricia's breakdown, Harlan's cold calculation, Melissa's desperate message. The pattern was there, clear as day. Acquire, use, destroy, and I'd recorded every second of it, but I said nothing. I just went back the next morning, pressed record, and drove. Harlan waited exactly 6 months after the divorce was finalized before he started dating again. Not dating, actually. Hunting. I drove him to charity galas, museum openings, to private dinners at restaurants where you needed connections just to get a reservation. He moved through these events like a shark, and I watched in the rearview mirror as he identified targets, calculated approaches, executed strategies. Sandra Mitchell was 28 when he met her, a nonprofit director, Columbia-educated, passionate about literacy programs in underserved communities. She had that earnest intelligence that some young women have before the world teaches them to hide it. Dark hair, warm eyes, the kind of smile that made you believe she actually cared. She never stood a chance. I was there the night they met, waiting outside some literacy fundraiser in the Bronx. Harlan had seemed bored going in, but when he came out 2 hours later, Sandra was with him, and something in his face had sharpened. Focused. Ms. Mitchell needed a ride home, he said. Her neighborhood is on our way. It wasn't. Her apartment was in Washington Heights. We were going to the Upper East Side, completely opposite directions. But I said, "Of course, sir," and held the door open. Over the next 3 months, I drove Harlan to Sandra's apartment at least twice a week. Flowers arrived at her office. I delivered some of them. Dinner reservations at places she mentioned loving, donations to her organization, introductions to wealthy board members. It was methodical, calculated, perfect. And the whole time, I knew about the other 2 women. Lauren, the gallery owner in Soho, who Harlan saw Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Rachel, a divorced lawyer, who he met for lunch on Wednesdays. I drove him to all of them, listened to all the phone calls. I recorded all the sweet words that were identical across all 3 relationships. "You're special," he told Sandra on a Tuesday night. "You're special," he told Lauren on a Thursday. The same script delivered with the same conviction to 3 different women who all believed they were the only one. 6 months after they met, Harlan proposed to Sandra. When they came out of the restaurant, she was crying happy tears, showing her ring to anyone who would look. Lauren and Rachel were gone by the end of that week. Phone calls unreturned, dinner plans canceled. They just ceased to exist in Harlan's world. The first year of marriage, Sandra glowed. She'd talk about how lucky she was, how Harlan supported her work. "He makes me feel seen," she told a friend once in the back seat. "Like I'm not just decoration, like my work matters to him." I said nothing, just drove, just recorded. But I knew the truth. I'd heard Harlan on the phone with his lawyer discussing the prenup, ensuring Sandra would have no claim to his assets. I'd heard him tell a business partner that the nonprofit donations were good optics and tax-deductible anyway. I'd driven him to hotels where he met women whose names I never learned. By year 2, Sandra's smile was dimmer. She talked less, stared out the window more. The recordings from that period are full of her silence, punctuated by occasional phone calls where she made excuses for Harlan's absences. "He's just busy," she'd say. "Building an empire takes time." But she hadn't known what she was signing up for. Not really. Year 3 was when it fell apart. One evening, I was waiting outside the townhouse when I heard shouting from inside. Then the front door slammed open and Sandra stormed out, Harlan following calmly. "Get in the car," he said. "We're not having this conversation on the street." "We're not having this conversation at all," Sandra shot back. But she got in anyway. I could see her hands shaking. "Just drive," Harlan told me. So I did. Around the block, through the park, anywhere, while behind me Sandra confronted her husband with everything she'd discovered. 3 women, Harlan, 3, while we were married, while I was making myself smaller to fit into your life. "You weren't making yourself smaller," Harlan interrupted. "I donated to your organization. I elevated your work. You bought me. That's what you do. You buy people. You bought me with donations and pretty words, and I was stupid enough to believe it meant something. You were compensated appropriately." The words hung in the air, cold and final. Sandra made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Compensated? I'm your wife, not an employee." "You're both," he said simply. "And frankly, you're underperforming in both capacities. My lawyer has prepared a settlement offer. It's generous. You'll sign it, along with an NDA, and we'll part ways amicably." "And if I don't?" Then we'll part ways less amicably, and you'll get exactly what the prenup stipulates, which is substantially less. Your choice. I watched them in the rearview mirror. Sandra's face was wet with tears. Harlan looked bored. "Why did you even marry me?" she whispered. "Because you were perfect," he said. "Smart, accomplished, passionate. Good optics. My board loved you, and you were young enough to be grateful to think I was doing you a favor. You're a monster. I'm a businessman. There's a difference." 2 weeks later, I drove Sandra to JFK. She was moving back to Chicago, back to her parents, back to rebuild whatever pieces of herself remained. She sat in the back seat with 2 suitcases, just like Patricia before her, and stared out the window in silence. We were almost to the airport when she finally spoke. "Did you know?" she asked quietly. "About the affairs?" My hands tightened on the wheel. "Ma'am." "It's okay. You don't have to answer. I already know you did. You drive him everywhere. You hear everything. You've probably heard things that would destroy him." She laughed bitterly. "But you won't say anything, will you? Because that's not your job. Your job is to drive and be invisible and pretend you don't see the wreckage." In my pocket, the recorder was running, recording her pain, recording my silence. "I signed the NDA," she said as I pulled up to departures. "I can't ever talk about what he did to me. Can't warn the next woman. Can't even tell my therapist the whole truth." She grabbed her bags and paused with her hand on the door. "I hope you're saving all those recordings," she said, "because someday someone needs to stop him." Then she was gone. That night, Harlan had dinner with his lawyer, Dennis. When they came out, Dennis was laughing. "She signed everything?" "Of course," Harlan said. "The NDA is airtight. She can't speak about me, about the marriage, about anything. It's like it never happened." "You're clear then. Clean slate for number 3. They both laughed, and I drove them in silence, my jaw so tight it hurt. When I got home, I pulled up the recordings from the last 3 years. Hours of Sandra's voice, her joy in the beginning, her hope, then the slow erosion, the doubts, the discovery, the destruction, and through it all, my silence. I thought about Melissa, who was 16 now, who hadn't spoken to her father in 4 months after Sandra left, who I'd picked up from school once and found crying in the back seat, not saying why. I thought about Patricia, silenced by her NDA and her shame. I thought about Sandra boarding a plane to Chicago with nothing but 2 suitcases and 3 years of trauma she wasn't allowed to speak about. And I thought about Harlan's words, clean slate for number 3. The pattern was clear now. Acquire, use, destroy, silence, repeat. I had hundreds of hours of recordings proving it. Proof of his methodical cruelty, his calculated manipulation, his complete lack of regard for the women he claimed to love. But I said nothing. I just labeled the files, backed them up, and went to bed. Tomorrow I'd press record again, because that was my job, even though the weight of it was starting to crush me. Harlan waited 8 months this time before he started hunting again. Ellen Voss was different from the others from the moment I picked her up for their first dinner. She didn't smile nervously or chatter to fill silence. She slid into the back seat like she owned it, checked her phone once, then put it away and stared out the window with the kind of calm focus that reminded me of Harlan himself. She was 42 when they met, and 10 years younger than Harlan, but a lifetime older than Sandra had been. Corporate attorney, Yale Law, made partner at 35. She had sharp features, expensive taste, and eyes that calculated odds before you finished speaking. I knew within 2 weeks that this marriage would be different, because Ellen knew exactly what Harlan was. The first clue came a month into their courtship. I was driving Ellen and her friend Diane to some charity luncheon. The privacy screen was up. "So it's serious with Buckley?" Diane asked. "Potentially," Ellen said, clinical. "The optics are good. He needs someone credible after the Sandra disaster. I bring legitimacy, professional gravitas. And what does he bring you? Access, connections, a tax bracket I'll never reach on my own. Ellen paused. I'm thinking 5 years, maybe 6. Time the market. And make the right connections. File before he gets suspicious. Diane laughed. You're planning the divorce before the wedding. I'm being pragmatic. He's a narcissist who collects women like art. I'm 42. This is my last chance at serious money. Why shouldn't I get something out of it? What about love? Love is a liability. Money is measurable. In my pocket, the recorder was running. The wedding was strategic, like everything Ellen did. Enough society presence to matter. Not so much that it looked desperate. I waited outside the venue, wondering what kind of marriage this would be. The first year, Harlan and Ellen operated like business partners. They attended events together, networked efficiently, divided social obligations. No honeymoon period, no glow. Just 2 people executing a mutually beneficial arrangement. But the recordings told a different story. Ellen went to therapy every Thursday at 3 p.m., and sometimes she'd make calls right after, her voice raw. I thought I could do this coldly, she told Diane 6 months into the marriage. Just play the role, take what I need, leave. But it's eating me. What is? Watching him. The way he talks about his own daughter. She came to dinner last week and he spent the whole meal on his phone. Didn't ask her one question. That's what you signed up for? I know. But there's knowing someone is a narcissist and then there's watching them destroy their own child and being complicit because you're benefiting from the same system. A pause. I married him for money, but I didn't think I'd become him. The second year, the mutual surveillance began. I'd drive Harlan to his accountant. Move the offshore accounts, restructure the trusts. Ellen's getting ideas. You think she'll file? I know she will. She's smart enough to have figured out the timeline. I give it another 2 years. She's building her case. 2 days later, Ellen would be on the phone. I need you to look into asset transfer laws. Hypothetically, if someone were to move money offshore during a marriage, what's the timeline for claiming half? They were both preparing for war, both playing the long game, both convinced they'd outmaneuver the other. By year 3, the contempt was mutual and undisguised. Harlan would talk about Ellen like she wasn't even a person. She thinks she's clever, documenting everything, building her narrative. But I wrote the prenup. Nah, she gets nothing. Ellen would sit in the back seat after brutal dinners, voice tight with rage. He introduced me as his current wife tonight. Current, like I'm a software version he's planning to upgrade. The recordings from that period are exhausting. 2 people locked in combat, neither willing to retreat, both too proud to admit the whole thing was pointless. Then Melissa came home for spring break. She was 19 now, a sophomore at NYU studying psychology. I picked her up from the train station and she looked older than her years, tired in a way that had nothing to do with school. "How are you, Toby?" she asked, and it startled me because she'd never asked before. "I'm well, miss. How's school?" "It's good. I'm learning a lot about personality disorders." She laughed without humor. "No, very relevant to my personal life." That night there was a family dinner. I waited outside, but the window was open and voices carried. "You look thin," Harlan said. It wasn't concern. It was criticism. "I'm fine." "Are you keeping up with your classes? I'm not paying $40,000 a year for you to party." "I have a 3.8 GPA, Dad." Just a dismissive sound. Then Ellen's voice trying, "Melissa, I read your essay on attachment theory. It was quite good." "You read my essay?" Melissa sounded genuinely surprised. "Yes. Your father forwarded it." "Why?" Harlan. "Ellen thought it might be useful for one of her cases, something about parental neglect." The cruelty was so casual it took my breath away. Using his daughter's academic work, probably a cry for help disguised as scholarship, as evidence in some legal case. Later that night, I drove Ellen to her therapist's emergency session. She called Diane from the car. "I can't do this anymore. Ellen said, voice shaking. I thought I was like him. I thought I could be cold and calculating, but I'm not him. I'm just someone who married him, which might be worse. What happened? His daughter. She's 19 and brilliant and dying inside because her father sees her as an inconvenience. And I've been here 3 years doing nothing because I'm waiting for the perfect moment to file. I'm letting a kid suffer so I can maximize my settlement. Ellen, I know what I am. I married a monster because I thought I could outsmart him. But you can't outsmart a monster without becoming one yourself. She got out without another word. The next morning, I picked Melissa up to drive her back to the train station. She was quiet for most of the ride. Then suddenly, "Can I ask you something, Toby?" "Of course." "Why do you stay? With my father? You've seen everything. You know what he is. Why don't you just leave?" My hands tightened on the wheel. "I need the job, miss." "Everyone needs a job, but there are other jobs. Jobs where you don't have to watch someone destroy everyone around them." I didn't have an answer for that. She was quiet then. "Ellen's not as bad as him, you know. She married him for money, which is gross, but at least she feels bad about it. At least she's capable of guilt." "Did she tell you that?" "No, but I can tell. She tried to talk to me last night, asked if I was okay. It was awkward, but she tried." Melissa paused. "You know what my father's never asked me? If I'm okay. Not once in 19 years. We pulled up to Penn Station and she grabbed her bag. I told Ellen once, 'You're just like him.' She didn't deny it. But you know what? At least she knows it. At least she's trying to feel something other than greed." She got out and disappeared into the crowd before I could respond. That night, I listened to the day's recordings. Ellen's breakdown, Melissa's quiet accusation, Harlan's casual cruelty, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. There were no heroes in this story. Ellen would eventually destroy Harlan. I could hear it in her voice, the way she was documenting everything, building her case. But Melissa would be collateral damage. She already was. Everyone in that back seat was using everyone else. Harlan used women. Ellen used Harlan. They both used Melissa as a pawn in their mutual destruction, and I used them all, recording their pain, their schemes, their cruelty, telling myself I was bearing witness when really I was just hoarding evidence I was too afraid to use. The weight of the recorder in my pocket had never felt heavier, but I still said nothing. I just pressed record and drove. I never meant to collect Melissa's voice. She was just there, in the background of 6 years of recordings. Background noise in her father's life, which is exactly what she was to him. Something in the periphery, easily ignored, never quite important enough to focus on. I started noticing her voice around year 2 when she was 14. The recordings from that period are full of her trying. "Dad, can we talk?" "Not now, Melissa, I'm on a call." 30 seconds of silence, and then the car door closing. I'd picked her up from school that day. Melissa had climbed into the back seat with a report card in her hand, all A's except 1 B+ in chemistry. She never got to show it to him. The pattern repeated throughout the recordings, her voice increasingly hesitant, increasingly uncertain about whether she was worth her father's time. Age 15. "Dad, I made the debate team." "That's nice." Not looking up from his phone. Age 16 after Sandra left. "Mom says you're threatening her lawyer." "Your mother is unstable, Melissa. Don't believe everything she tells you." "But she's crying all the time and—" "That's manipulation. She's trying to turn you against me." I had 6 years of recordings proving his absences, his dismissals, his complete disinterest in his daughter's life unless it affected him directly. Age 18, the day she got her acceptance letters. She was clutching the Yale letter when she got in the car. "Toby, I got into Yale." "Congratulations, miss. That's wonderful." She'd called her father from the car, speaker on because she was too excited to hold the phone properly. "Dad, I got into Yale." "Did you?" Not a question. A flat statement. "Yes, early decision. I got the letter today and... Can you afford it yourself? Silence. I watched her face in the rearview mirror, watched the excitement drain out like someone had pulled a plug. What? I asked if you can afford it yourself. Yale is what, $80,000 a year now? You're a billionaire, Dad. And you're entitled. Maybe if you'd applied for scholarships instead of assuming I'd foot the bill? I did apply for scholarships. I got a partial academic scholarship, but partial. So you want me to cover the rest? I thought you'd be proud. I'm proud you got in. I'm less proud that your first instinct is to reach for my wallet. He'd hung up. Melissa had sat in the back seat, staring at the acceptance letter, and then folded it very carefully, very precisely, until it was small enough to fit in her pocket. She didn't cry. She just went very still. He's going to pay for it, isn't he, Toby? I didn't know what to say. I'm sure you'll work it out, miss. Yeah, she said quietly. I'm sure. He did pay for it eventually, but only after making her submit a budget proposal, only after treating her education like a business investment that needed to be justified. The recordings from her first year at NYU are sparse. She stopped calling him, stopped trying. Then, 3 weeks ago, something changed. I noticed a cluster of voicemails from Melissa. She'd called her father 6 times in 2 weeks. He'd answered exactly once. Dad, I need to talk to you about something. Make it quick. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I've been having panic attacks, like really bad ones. I thought maybe I could see someone, a therapist, but the student health center has a 3-month wait list and so see someone off campus. That's not covered by insurance. It's $200 a session and... Melissa, you have an allowance. Budget for it. My allowance barely covers food and books. I can't afford... Then get a job, or use the student health center. That's what I pay tuition for. I just told you they have a 3-month wait list. Then I guess you'll learn patience. And frankly, this sounds like manipulation. You want me to fund therapy so some stranger can tell you I'm a bad father. That's not... Dad, I'm really struggling. I'm not okay. Everyone struggles in college, Melissa. It builds character. I'm not rewarding dramatic behavior with blank checks. He'd hung up. I'd listened to that recording 3 times, trying to understand how a father could hear his daughter say, I'm not okay, and respond with accusations of manipulation. 2 days later, I drove Ellen to lunch with a friend. Privacy screen up. How's Harlan's daughter? The friend asked. Melissa? Not good. She called him last week begging for help paying for therapy. Panic attacks. He told her to use her allowance. Jesus! That's cold even for him. The daughter is his blind spot, Ellen said. Not like he loves her too much to see clearly, the opposite. He can't see that he's destroying her. Every time he looks at her, he sees Patricia, and he hated Patricia. So he punishes Melissa without even realizing he's doing it. I'd filed that recording and tried not to think about it. Then, last week, I was doing routine maintenance on the car's system when I noticed an old voicemail notification. It had come through the Bluetooth 3 days before Melissa's overdose, but Harlan had never listened to it. I almost deleted it. But I didn't. I plugged in my headphones and pressed play. Dad, it's me. Melissa's voice was flat, exhausted. I know you're busy. You're always busy, but I really need to talk to you. I'm not okay. I'm really not okay. The panic attacks are getting worse and I'm having these thoughts that scare me and I don't know what to do. She paused, breathing hard, trying to steady herself. I don't know why I'm calling. You never listen to these anyway. You'll see my name and delete it or decide I'm being dramatic. That's what you always decide. But I'm leaving this message anyway because I need someone to know. I need there to be a record somewhere that I tried to ask for help, that I said I wasn't okay. So this is me saying it. Dad, I'm not okay. I need help. Please call me back. The timestamp on the voicemail was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Melissa had overdosed on Friday morning. 72 hours between her asking for help and trying to die. 72 hours during which her father never called her back, never even listened to the message. I sat in my apartment at 3 a.m., headphones still on, staring at nothing. For 6 years I'd been recording, bearing witness, collecting evidence. But I'd never used it. I'd watched Patricia get destroyed and said nothing. I'd watched Sandra get silenced and said nothing. I'd watched Ellen slowly realize she was becoming the thing she married and said nothing. And I'd listened to Melissa's voice get smaller and more desperate over 6 years, culminating in a voicemail begging for help that her father never heard. And I'd said nothing. 3 days after that voicemail, Melissa had swallowed a bottle of pills, and I'd driven her father to the hospital where he'd paced outside the ICU, not calling family, but calling his PR team, asking how to contain this situation. I pulled up my recording library, hundreds of hours. 6 years of evidence, every moment Harlan dismissed his daughter, every cruel calculation, every wife destroyed, every manipulation documented. And suddenly, I knew. I knew that if I didn't do something, Melissa would try again, and Harlan would move on, find wife number 4, destroy her too, and the pattern would continue forever. Because people like me saw everything and said nothing. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Melissa Evidence. And I started compiling every recording of Harlan dismissing her, every voicemail she'd left that he never answered, every time she'd asked for help and been told she was manipulating, the Yale acceptance call, the therapy request, and finally, the last voicemail, the one he never listened to. The one time stamped 3 days before she tried to die. "Dad, I'm not okay. I need help. Please call me back." I burned it all to a USB drive. Then I wrote a note. I wrote it 10 times, 20 times, trying to find the right words. Finally, I settled on the truth. Your daughter deserved better than this. They all did. The sun was coming up when I finished. I sat there holding the USB drive, feeling its weight. 6 years of silence. 6 years of complicity. 6 years of telling myself that recording it was enough, that bearing witness mattered. But the truth was, I was the only one who could care. I was the only one who'd seen it all. I was the only one who could stop it. My phone buzzed. Harlan texting about the morning pickup time. I looked at the USB drive. Then I got dressed for work. Because today was the day I stopped being invisible. I called in sick for the first time in 6 years. Harlan's text came at 5:30 a.m. Pickup 6:30 airport run. My reply, I'm sick. Won't be in today. How long? Not sure. Maybe a few days. Fine. I'll use a service. That was it. In 6 years of perfect attendance, and he couldn't even ask what was wrong. I turned off my phone and got to work. My apartment was small, 1 bedroom in Queens, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors through the walls. But I had a desk, a laptop, and 72 hours. I started with the recordings, 6 years of audio files, hundreds of gigabytes, thousands of hours of conversations. I needed to make sense of it. To find the pattern, to build a case that was undeniable, marriage by marriage, betrayal by betrayal. I started with Patricia. The first recording of her affair, the conversation with her sister. I married money, not a man. I clipped it, labeled it Patricia-01-affair-beginning. Then Harlan discovering it. I want her destroyed. Prenup enforcement, reputation annihilation. The divorce proceedings. Patricia's breakdown. He never loved me. I was an acquisition. Young Melissa begging, don't hurt Mom. And Harlan's dismissal. I organized it all chronologically, created a document with timestamps and transcripts, the full arc of how Harlan acquired a woman, used her, then systematically destroyed her. 12 hours for Patricia's timeline, then Sandra. his pursuit while simultaneously seeing two other women. The identical scripts. You're special, you're different. The slow erosion of her confidence, her discovery, that devastating conversation. I gave up my career. You were compensated appropriately. The NDA, the airport drive where she said, someone needs to stop him. Another 12 hours, and marriage 2 was documented with brutal clarity. Ellen was more complicated. She'd gone in knowing what Harlan was, and planning her own exit, but the recording showed her transformation, from cold strategist to someone capable of guilt. I thought I could do this coldly, but it's eating me. The mutual surveillance, both preparing for war, both documenting each other's moves. I included it all because it showed the pattern, how Harlan either destroyed women or turned them into versions of himself. By hour 36, I had 3 complete timelines, 3 marriages, 3 destructions. But that wasn't enough. I went back through looking for financial crimes. I found Harlan instructing his accountant to move money offshore during Sandra's divorce, clear violation of disclosure requirements. I found him coaching his lawyer on exploiting loopholes, hiding assets, making Patricia look unstable. I found conversations about restructuring trusts to keep them from Ellen, violating their marriage agreement, and then the bonus material. Hour 48, a recording from 2 years ago, Harlan on the phone with Marcus. The FDA approval is coming down next week, Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. You're sure? I have someone on the inside. Buy the stock now, sell Friday. Easy money. Insider trading, clear, obvious, recorded. I found 3 more conversations like it. Different companies, same pattern. I burned it all to a USB drive, created a master document, timestamps, summaries, key quotes. 54 hours in, I had the evidence. Irrefutable, devastating. I went to the electronics store. Marcus was behind the counter. Toby, you look like hell, man. I need 3 USB drives, high quality. What for? Insurance. He studied me, and then pulled 3 drives from the locked cabinet. Military grade. These are the ones I'd trust with my life. I went home and spent 6 hours making 3 identical copies. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence. Then I started on the note. First attempt. Harlan Buckley is a monster who destroys everyone he touches. Too angry. Would be dismissed. Second attempt. Enclosed is documentation of systematic abuse and financial crimes. Too clinical. Lost the human element. Third attempt. I've watched you destroy 3 marriages and your own daughter. Too personal. Made it about me. I wrote 20 versions. Crumpled paper filled my trash can. 3 a.m. on the 3rd day, I finally got it right. Your daughter deserved better than this. They all did. 1 sentence. Simple. True. I printed it 3 times, 1 for each drive. My mother knocked on my door. She'd been worried. I'd barely left my room in 3 days. Toby, why aren't you sleeping? I looked at the 3 USB drives on my desk. I'm finishing something I should have started years ago. What is it? I thought about telling her, but she was 72 and tired, and she'd spent her whole life teaching me to keep my head down. Just work stuff, Mom. Nothing to worry about. She didn't believe me, but nodded anyway. When you're done, you'll rest? Yeah, Mom, I'll rest. She kissed my forehead and shuffled back to her room. I sat looking at the 3 drives. Drive 1. For Harlan. So he'd know someone had witnessed it all. Drive 2. For Patricia's lawyer. She'd tried to fight and lost because she didn't have evidence. Now she'd have everything. Drive 3. For my safe deposit box. Insurance. Proof that couldn't be destroyed. I held drive 1, feeling its weight. This small piece of plastic contained 6 years of truth, 6 years of cruelty and manipulation and destruction, 6 years of me doing nothing. I thought about Melissa in the hospital, Patricia broken and silenced, Sandra saying, "Someone needs to stop him." Ellen trapped in a marriage making her a monster. I'd been lying to myself for 6 years, but that ended today. I packed the 3 drives. Drive 1 into my jacket pocket. I'd deliver that myself. Drive 2 into a padded envelope for Patricia's lawyer. Drive 3 for the bank. I pulled up Harlan's schedule. Tomorrow, Tuesday. He'd be home all morning, working from his study. Perfect. I'd go for routine maintenance. The staff was used to seeing me. No one would question it. And while everyone assumed I was with the car, I'd walk into his study and place the USB drive in the center of his desk, with the note on top. Then I'd leave. I lay down fully clothed, the jacket with drive 1 still on. For the first time in 6 years, I slept without the recorder running. I didn't need to record anymore. I'd already captured everything that mattered. I woke at dawn. My mother was making coffee. "You look better," she said. "More settled." "I feel better." "This work thing, you finished it?" I touched the USB drive in my pocket. "Almost. One more thing to do." She studied my face. She knew what it looked like when someone was about to do something they couldn't take back. "Whatever it is," she said quietly, "make sure it's worth it." I thought about Melissa's voicemail. "Dad, I'm not okay. I need help." "It's worth it," I said. She nodded, satisfied. I drove to Harlan's estate at 9 a.m. The guard waved me through. I'd been coming here for 6 years. I parked and grabbed my toolbox. Routine maintenance, normal Tuesday. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket. My hands were steady as I walked toward the house. 6 years of witnessing was about to become 6 years of evidence, and I was about to stop being invisible. The guard at the gate recognized my car and waved me through. Why wouldn't he? I'd been making this drive every Tuesday for 6 years. Routine maintenance. Except today wasn't routine. The USB drive in my jacket pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I parked near the garage and grabbed my toolbox. Through the kitchen window, I could see staff moving around. Normal Tuesday morning. Nobody paid attention to the chauffeur. I was halfway to the garage when I heard the front door open. "Toby." I turned. Harlan was walking toward me, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing for me to wait. My heart stopped. What did he know? But then he was just climbing into the backseat of the Mercedes, still on his call. He needed a last-minute drive. Of course. "Airport. I have a 10 a.m. to D.C. He didn't look at me. I got behind the wheel, hands shaking slightly. The USB drive pressed against my ribs. This wasn't the plan, but maybe this was better. One last drive. Harlan was talking to someone, that particular tone of exasperation he used for inconveniences. The hospital called again. "Melissa's being discharged tomorrow." He paused. "No, I won't be there. I'll send Ellen." Silence. Look, Melissa was always unstable. And her mother's genetics. Patricia was a mess, and her daughter inherited it. This whole overdose thing is just attention-seeking behavior that I refuse to reward. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. He was scrolling through emails, discussing his daughter's suicide attempt like it was a scheduling conflict. I've told my PR team to spin it as a private health matter. The board doesn't need this kind of drama. Something in my chest went very still. Final confirmation. Hearing him reduce Melissa's near death to a PR problem, hearing him blame genetics, hearing that complete absence of basic human decency, I was right to do this. We pulled up to JFK departures. Harlan grabbed his bag without a word. "I'll need pickup at 8 p.m., same terminal." "Yes, sir?" He walked away, phone still pressed to his ear. I sat there for a long moment, watching him disappear. Then I drove back to the estate. The guard waved me through again. The staff was still busy inside. I parked and walked to the garage like I was going to work on the car, got my toolbox, opened the hood. Then I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Through the window, I watched the housekeeper move upstairs. The cook went outside to the garden. The coast was clear. I walked in through the side entrance, straight through the hallway to Harlan's study. The door was open. His desk was massive, mahogany, covered in papers, photos on the wall, Harlan shaking hands with politicians, receiving awards. No photos of his daughter. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. The note was attached. Your daughter deserved better than this. They all did. My hands were steady as I placed it in the exact center of his desk. 6 years of evidence, compressed into something smaller than a pack of cards. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. At 4 p.m., I mailed the second USB drive to Patricia's lawyer. At 5 p.m., I put the third drive in my safe deposit box. At 7 p.m., I turned off my phone. Harlan would be landing at 8 p.m. He'd call for his pickup and I wouldn't answer. Someone else would have to be invisible for him now. I sat in my apartment and waited. Somewhere across the city, Harlan Buckley was about to walk into his study and find a USB drive that would unravel his entire life. Harlan found the drive at 8:47 p.m. I know because that's when my phone started buzzing. I'd turned it back on, unable to resist. First call, Harlan, voicemail. Toby, where the hell are you? I've been waiting for 20 minutes. And call me back immediately. Second call, 10 minutes later. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to call me right now. This is urgent. He'd found it. Third call, Ellen. Her voicemail. Toby, Harlan just called me screaming about recordings. If you did what I think you did, good for you. I'm packing right now. I should have left years ago. Fourth call, a number I didn't recognize. His lawyer, probably. Fifth call. Harlan again. Just heavy breathing then. You're finished. You understand that? Finished. I will destroy you for this. But he wouldn't. Because destroying me would require admitting what was on those recordings. I turned the phone off again. This is what happened. Harlan took an Uber home, furious. He went to his study to work when he noticed the USB drive on his desk. The note. Your daughter deserved better than this. They all did. He plugged it in, skeptical, annoyed. The drive opened to hundreds of folders, organized by date, by person, by category. He clicked on one, Marriage 1-Patricia. Subfolder, Audio-recordings. He clicked play. His own voice filled his study. I want her destroyed. Prenup enforcement, reputation annihilation. His lawyer responding, we'll make her look unstable. He went very still. Another file. Women are investments. Cut losses early. Another. Move the offshore accounts before Sandra notices. Another. The FDA approval is coming Tuesday. Buy now, sell Friday. He scrolled through the folders, face draining of color. 6 years, hundreds of hours, every phone call, every conversation, every casual cruelty. Now there was a folder labeled Melissa. He opened it with shaking hands. Every dismissal. Every time he'd told her no. Every time he'd called her dramatic, manipulative, entitled. The Yale conversation. The therapy request. And at the bottom, final voicemail 3 days before overdose. He clicked play. Dad, it's me. I know you're busy, but I really need to talk to you. I'm not okay. I'm really not okay. Melissa's voice, flat and exhausted, begging for help. He listened to the whole thing. Then he closed the laptop and sat in silence for 30 seconds. Then he called his lawyer. Dennis, someone recorded me, for years. Everything. Harlan, I just got an envelope from Patricia's legal team. They have recordings, hours of them. They're reopening the settlement. That's not possible. The driver. It had to be. See who else would have access? Harlan went to the window, looked at his empty driveway. The garage where the Mercedes sat, perfectly maintained by the invisible man who'd been listening for 6 years. Get him. I want him arrested, sued, destroyed. On what grounds? If he was recording in a place where you had no reasonable expectation of privacy? The car had a privacy screen. Which blocks sight, not sound, and he was physically present. Harlan, if these recordings are real, you have bigger problems. That's when Ellen called saying she was leaving. That's when his accountant called about SEC inquiries. That's when Harlan Buckley realized that his invisible driver had seen everything, recorded everything, and had waited 6 years to destroy him, and there was nothing he could do about it. Because the truth was the truth. And it was all on tape. I didn't know all the details that night. Those came later from news reports and Ellen's testimony. But sitting in my apartment at 9 p.m., phone off, my mother watching TV beside me, I knew enough. I knew that 6 years of silence had ended. I knew that the invisible man had finally spoken. And I knew that Harlan Buckley was about to learn what it felt like when the observed became the observer, when the furniture started talking back, when the truth stopped being optional. I slept that night for 10 hours straight, and when I woke up, I wasn't a chauffeur anymore. I was just Toby, and for the first time in 6 years, that was enough. The first day of the end of Harlan Buckley's empire began not with a roar, but with the hollow sound of a suitcase zipping shut. Ellen didn't wait for an explanation, and she didn't ask for one. Armed with the digital copies I had slipped onto the server she shared with Harlan, she walked out of the townhouse before the sun was fully up. By noon, her attorneys had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences backed by 34 gigabytes of audio evidence. The recordings didn't just show a cold marriage, they showed a husband who had actively sabotaged his wife's legal standing from the back seat of his own car. For the first time in his life, Harlan wasn't the one holding the leverage. By the second day, the dominoes I had set in motion across town began to fall. Patricia's lawyer, a man who had been humiliated by Harlan's legal team years prior, didn't just file to reopen her settlement. He went for the jugular. The recordings I provided proved that Harlan had hidden nearly $200 million in offshore accounts during their divorce, coaching his accountants while I sat 3 feet away. The radical transparency mogul was revealed as a common fraud. Patricia, the woman who had left with 2 suitcases and a broken spirit, was suddenly the most dangerous person in his life. The third day brought the return of Sandra. Because the recordings contained evidence of Harlan admitting to financial fraud and witness tampering, her non-disclosure agreement was legally shredded. The gag was off. She appeared on a local news segment, her voice steady for the first time in years, describing the systematic emotional erosion she had endured. She didn't have to worry about Harlan's lawyers anymore. I had given her the audio of Harlan admitting he had compensated her appropriately for her silence while he pursued 3 other women. The investment had finally matured, and the interest was more than Harlan could afford to pay. By day 4, the silence of the black Mercedes was replaced by the roar of 1,000 headlines. Selected clips, the most damning ones involving Harlan's views on women and his own daughter, hit the internet. I hadn't sent them to the press, but once a legal discovery begins in 3 separate high-profile divorces, nothing stays secret. His business partners, men who had laughed along with his "women are investments" jokes just weeks ago, began releasing statements about shared values and immediate resignation. They weren't offended by his cruelty, they were terrified of his contagion. The 5th day was the quietest, and therefore the most lethal. The SEC didn't release a press statement. They simply arrived at Buckley Tech with a stack of subpoenas. My recordings of the FDA insider tips had found their way to the right desks. Harlan wasn't just losing his wives and his reputation anymore. He was looking at a federal indictment. The empire built on the philosophy of being seen was being dismantled by everything he thought was hidden. On the 6th day, the bravado finally broke. I heard through the grapevine that Harlan's lead attorney Dennis had sat him down in that massive, empty mahogany study and told him the truth. "You need to settle. All of them. Now. If these tapes play in a courtroom, you won't just be broke. You'll be in a jumpsuit." For the first time in 19 years, Harlan Buckley found himself in a position where money couldn't buy discretion. It could only buy a slightly less public defeat. On the seventh day, the world came to my front door. I was sitting in my mother's kitchen, helping her sort her morning pills, when the heavy, rhythmic thudding started. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't a process server. It was the sound of a man who still believed he could kick a door down and demand the world obey him. I told my mother to stay in the kitchen, and I walked to the door. Harlan Buckley stood in the hallway of our cramped Queens apartment building. He looked like a ghost of the man I'd driven for 6 years. His silver hair was unwashed, his charcoal suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild. He didn't wait for me to speak. He lunged forward, stopping just inches from my face, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. "I trusted you," he hissed, his voice cracking. "I gave you a life. I gave you health insurance for your mother. I let you into my world, into my home. I trusted you with everything, and you spent 6 years stabbing me in the back every time I sat in that car." I looked at him, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't look through the rearview mirror. I looked him directly in the eye, my hands steady at my sides. I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel anger. I just felt a profound sense of relief that the performance was over. "You didn't trust me, Harlan," I said, my voice calm and low. "You can't trust something you don't even see. You trusted that I was invisible. You trusted that because I wore a uniform and held a door, I didn't have ears. Or a conscience." "I'll destroy you," he growled, stepping closer, his hands shaking. "I have resources you can't even imagine. I will tie you up in court until you're 90. I'll make sure you never drive a tricycle in this city, let alone a car. You think you've won? You've just signed your own death warrant." I almost laughed. It was the same script, the same threats he'd used on Patricia, on Sandra, on his business rivals. He only had one gear: destruction. "You already tried to destroy your daughter, Harlan," I said, and the mention of her name made him flinch as if I'd struck him. "That's why we're here. I sat in that car and listened to her beg for a father for 6 years. I heard her last voicemail, the one you didn't even bother to click on. I heard you call her an attention seeker while she was lying in a hospital bed." I leaned in, mirroring his intensity. "You think I'm the one who destroyed you? I just held the mirror. You're the one who couldn't stand the sight of what was in it. You can sue me, you can threaten me, but you can't unrecord the truth. Those women aren't silent anymore. Melissa isn't a PR problem anymore. She's a person. And for the first time in your life, you're the one who's invisible." Harlan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked around the dingy hallway, at the peeling wallpaper and the flickering fluorescent light, and he seemed to realize where he was. He was a billionaire in a walk-up apartment, arguing with a man he used to treat like a GPS system. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had evaporated. "Get out of my house, Harlan," I said. He stared at me for a long beat, a flicker of the old predatory fire in his eyes, but it was dying. He turned without a word and walked down the stairs, his footsteps heavy and uneven. I watched him go, not through a piece of glass, but with my own eyes. I closed the door and locked it. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the Mercedes. It was the quiet of a room where nothing was being hidden. I went back into the kitchen, sat down with my mother, and picked up the next pill bottle. The 7 days were over. The truth was out. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about what was being said in the back seat. I was finally the one in control of the journey. Would you like me to move on to the final chapter, focusing on the aftermath for Melissa and Toby's new life? The fluorescent lights of the ICU were the first things Melissa saw when she finally drifted back into the world of the living. She was weak, her voice a raspy ghost of itself, but she wasn't alone. Patricia was there, sitting by the bed with a laptop and a look of fierce, protective clarity I hadn't seen in any of my recordings. I wasn't in the room, but I can imagine the moment the audio began to play. The moment Melissa heard her own father's voice, cold and clinical, dismissing her life as a PR hurdle. Patricia didn't play the clips to hurt her daughter. She played them to heal her. "You weren't crazy, Melissa," she had whispered, leaning over the hospital bed. "You weren't dramatic, and you weren't failing. He was just cruel. And now, the whole world knows it." For a girl who had spent 19 years gasping for air in a vacuum of gaslighting, those recordings were the first breath of pure oxygen she'd ever had. The legal fallout that followed was a tectonic shift. With the recordings acting as an undeniable roadmap to hidden assets and systemic emotional battery, the courts moved with a speed Harlan's money could no longer check. All 3 ex-wives received settlements that were finally, indisputably fair. The pattern of abuse was no longer a collection of he said, she said rumors whispered in high society circles. It was a documented historical record. Patricia secured the stability she had been robbed of years ago. Sandra received the restitution she needed to restart her life in Chicago, and Ellen, ever the strategist, walked away with enough to ensure she would never have to marry for access again. Harlan's empire didn't collapse entirely. Men like him usually have enough layers of armor to survive the initial blast, but it emerged from the rubble diminished and gray. The Buckley brand, once synonymous with radical transparency, became a punchline, a cautionary tale taught in business schools about the cost of a toxic culture. He kept his company, but he lost his throne. The most telling change, however, was inside the car. Harlan hired a new chauffeur, a man who reportedly spoke 4 languages and had a background in military security. But the power dynamic had shifted forever. Sources said Harlan now spent his commutes in a state of low-grade paranoia, obsessively checking the seals on the privacy screen, his voice never rising above a hushed, careful whisper even when he was alone. He was a king who had realized his palace walls were made of microphones. I didn't stick around to watch the final act. I knew that once the dust settled, Harlan's legal team would come for me with everything they had left. I waited until my mother was safely settled in a quiet, comfortable apartment in a different state, funded by a small portion of the insurance I'd kept for ourselves. I left her a single note on the kitchen table before I slipped away into the early morning fog. I finally did something that mattered. Don't tell them where I am. I'm going to be okay. 6 months later, the world looks very different. Melissa is in therapy, not the student clinic version she'd begged for, but the kind of intensive, specialized care she deserved. She's using a portion of her settlement to fund a foundation for children of high-conflict divorces, turning her father's neglect into a lifeline for others. Ellen has become a formidable force in her own right, using her wealth to bankroll a legal defense organization for women trapped in coercive marriages. And Patricia's memoir, The Silent Passenger, hit the bestseller list within a week. In the acknowledgments, she wrote a single line that stayed with me. "To the anonymous source who witnessed it all, thank you for being the only one who didn't look away." As for me, I'm in a city where the air smells like salt, and the pace of life doesn't feel like a race toward a cliff. I still drive. I'm behind the wheel of a modest, well-maintained sedan, but I don't wear a suit, and I don't work for a man who thinks he's a god. Today, I'm driving a young family, a mother, a father, and 2 kids who haven't stopped chattering about their school play since I picked them up. I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror as the kids argued playfully over who got the window seat. I wasn't looking for a jaw-tightening or a calculated lie. I was just looking at a man who was finally at peace. I smiled, and for the first time, I didn't care if they noticed. He learned that invisibility was temporary. Truth, recorded carefully and released strategically, was permanent. And some silences, when finally broken, shatter everything.